Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
In the middle of the celebration, the woman wanted to be alone with her husband to share some happy news, but he had disappeared. And when his mocking voice echoed from the study, she froze. What she heard next sent a chill down her spine. Welcome, dear listeners. Let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and I'll begin a new story. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I hope you enjoy this hour with us. Carmen adjusted the white tablecloth on the table and stepped back. The crystal glasses sparkled in the October sunlight, and the platters were beautifully arranged with homemade tapas and roasted pork. The festive table looked perfect. Today was her mother-in-law's 60th birthday. The guests were expected to arrive in an hour, and Carmen was in an especially good mood, not just because of the celebration. In her jeans pocket was a pregnancy test, 2 lines. The long-awaited 2 lines after 3 years of trying. Carmen smiled and placed her hand on her belly. Nothing was visible yet, but inside, their child was growing, the baby she had dreamed of for so long. 3 years of trying, 3 years of hope and disappointment. Every month Carmen bought tests at the pharmacy, and every time, it was just 1 line. Carlos comforted her, held her close, told her it would all work out. The young couple went to doctors together, got tested, underwent treatments. Then yesterday morning, Carmen had a wave of nausea. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? She ran to the pharmacy for a test, and there they were, the cherished 2 lines. Today, Carmen would tell her husband the joyful news. She imagined Carlos's eyes lighting up, how he would sweep her into his arms and spin her around the room, both of them laughing and crying with happiness. Carmen, where are you? Carlos's voice called from the hallway. Here, in the kitchen. Carmen replied cheerfully. Carlos appeared in the doorway, a tall, fit man wearing a new sea green shirt. In the 5 years of their marriage, Carlos had barely changed, only a few small crow's feet around his eyes, subtle, but giving him a more masculine look. It looks amazing, Carlos said admiringly as he looked over the table. Mom's going to be thrilled. Carmen approached her husband, adjusting his shirt collar. Carlos smelled of his familiar cologne and freshness, that scent always calmed her, made her feel happy. Listen, how about we talk after the guests leave, Carmen said softly. I have some news. What kind of news? Carlos asked, intrigued. He looked at his wife attentively. Good news, Carmen answered with a mysterious smile. Very good, but I'll tell you later, when we're alone. You're teasing me, Carlos said with a smile and kissed her on the forehead. All right, I'll wait. The doorbell interrupted their conversation. The first guests to arrive were Carlos's parents. Dolores, the birthday girl, carried herself with the dignity of a queen. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant updo, and her navy blue suit fit her perfectly. Carmen, dear, Dolores said warmly, embracing her daughter-in-law. You've gone to so much effort. Everything looks absolutely wonderful. Carlos's father, Rafael, gave Carmen a silent nod. Rafael had always been a man of few words, but he was kind. He brought a bouquet of white chrysanthemums and a bottle of good sherry. Soon the other guests began to arrive, Carlos's sister Isabel with her husband and children, Dolores's former colleagues, and some neighbors from the building. Isabel was 3 years younger than Carlos, an energetic woman with a short haircut. She worked as an accountant for a trading company, and her husband, Miguel, was a factory mechanic. They had 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. Oh wow, Carmen, what a table! Isabel exclaimed in admiration. You're a real homemaker. Thank you, Carmen replied modestly. I wanted everything to be special for Mom. Dolores's former colleagues were all retired women who had worked with her at the school. Dolores had taught Spanish language and literature, and her co-workers used to call her the strictest teacher in the whole school. Dolores, you're amazing, one of the women said. You raised such a wonderful daughter-in-law. I didn't raise her, Dolores corrected with a smile. Carmen is just that wonderful all on her own. Carmen bustled between the kitchen and the living room, serving food, pouring sangria, making sure everyone had something to eat. She loved hosting guests and enjoyed creating a warm, cozy atmosphere. The table was full of traditional tapas, croquettes with jamon, potato tortilla, seafood paella, and manchego cheese with quince paste. Carmen had been cooking since the morning. For the main course, she had prepared oven-roasted pork with garlic and spices, rosemary potatoes, and a vegetable stew with eggplant and peppers. Carlos entertained the guests with jokes and stories about a recent business trip to a nearby town. He helped his father open the sherry. Carlos was the life of the party, as always. "I was on a business trip recently," Carlos told the guests with a cheerful tone. "I get to the hotel, and guess what happened?" The guests listened with interest. Carlos knew how to tell a good story. His delivery was lively and humorous. "I walk into my room, and someone's already living there." Carlos continued with a grin. "There's this guy running around in his underwear, shouting that it's his room." Everyone burst out laughing as Carlos mimicked the outraged man, flailing his arms like the guy in the story. Just then, a child's cry came from the kid's room. Isabel's son had spilled sangria on his new shirt. "Oh no, what did you do?" Isabel cried, alarmed. "Carmen, do you have a towel?" "I'll get one," Carmen called and hurried off to the bathroom. "It's okay," Dolores reassured Isabel. "Kids will be kids." "Our Carlos is just amazing," one of Dolores's friends said. "So handsome, smart, and practical. Carmen, you're lucky to have him." "Yes, I know," Carmen replied with a warm smile. "Very lucky." She truly believed it. Carlos was the perfect husband, attentive, caring, hardworking. He earned well working for a construction company, didn't drink, didn't cheat, helped around the house, and dreamed of having children just as much as Carmen did. By 3 p.m., the table was half empty. The guests had spread out around the living room with cups of coffee, the children were playing in the kids' room, and the adults were chatting about work, the weather, and store prices. "The utility bills have gone completely crazy," one of the colleagues complained. "You pay for a 2-bedroom like it's a 3-bedroom now." "And groceries in the shops," sighed another colleague. "Jamon is more expensive than gold these days." "Oh, you don't say," the neighbor joined in. "Have you seen the gas prices? Up 20 centimos in a month." Carmen listened to the guests' conversations with only half an ear. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the test in her pocket, on the future baby, on the happy news she was about to share with her husband. She quietly slipped away to the bathroom, took the test from her pocket, and looked again. 2 clear lines, no doubt about it. Carmen imagined how she would tell Carlos, how delighted he would be with the news, how the young couple would start planning the nursery, choosing a name, buying a stroller and a crib. If it was a boy, they would name him Diego, if a girl, Sofia. Carmen and Carlos had chosen those names a year ago, dreaming, planning their future. The nursery was already prepared. It currently held a sofa bed for guests, but it could easily be removed to make room for a crib, a changing table, and a wardrobe for baby clothes. Carmen pressed the test to her chest and closed her eyes, overwhelmed with joy. At last, her family would be complete. Laughter rang out from the living room. Someone was telling a funny story. Carmen tucked the test back into her pocket and returned to the guests. "Where's our Carlos?" her mother-in-law asked with concern. "I haven't seen him in a while." Carmen looked around. Sure enough, her husband was nowhere to be seen. She checked the kitchen, glanced out onto the balcony, empty. "Maybe he went to the study?" Isabel suggested logically. "He's got work papers in there. Maybe something urgent came up." Working even on weekends, Dolores shook her head disapprovingly. "Carmen, keep an eye on him or he'll wear himself out." "Of course, Mama," Carmen nodded obediently. She headed toward the study. The door was ajar, and she could hear Carlos's muffled voice from inside. He was on the phone. Carmen was about to knock, but something made her stop. His tone sounded strange, too quiet, almost a whisper. "I understand you're tired of waiting," Carlos said softly, "but I can't right now. The house is full of guests." Carmen froze at the door. Who was he talking to? What was this about? No, I can't leave now, Carlos continued, sounding guilty. It's my mother's birthday. How would that look? Carmen felt her heart start to pound. Her husband's voice had a tone of apology, as if he were explaining himself to someone else. Listen, what am I supposed to do now with Carmen? Carlos suddenly laughed, mocking and unpleasant. She actually believes in our relationship, like a fool. She's making plans for the future. Carmen recoiled from the door, the blood drained from her face, and a ringing filled her ears. Carlos had said her name with such disdain. Yeah, I know you're tired of waiting, Carlos went on indifferently. I'm sick of this happy family charade too, but just hang on a little longer. It'll all be sorted out soon. Carmen gasped, her legs turning to jelly. She barely managed to stay on her feet. No, she suspects nothing, Carlos laughed scornfully. Completely naive. Thinks I love her. Can you believe it? 28 years old and such a little fool. His words struck her like hammer blows. She clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Of course I love you, Carlos's voice turned tender. Only you. As for Carmen, we'll figure something out later. Maybe I'll just move out, tell her my feelings are gone. Oh, come on, don't worry so much, he added soothingly. Give it a month or two, it'll be over. I'll find a reason for divorce, say we're not right for each other. Carmen turned and ran to the bedroom. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. She collapsed onto the bed, clutching her head. This couldn't be real, this had to be a misunderstanding. Carlos couldn't say those things about his wife. But it was his voice. The familiar tone. The sneer was genuine. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of love, care, and shared dreams, all of it had been a lie. Carmen took the pregnancy test out of her pocket. The two lines stared up at her mockingly. How could she tell him now? How could she even look him in the eyes? Laughter and voices rang out from the living room. The party was still going. Life went on, but Carmen's world was falling apart. She remembered the first time she met Carlos. He had worked in the same construction company, but in a different department. They had met in the company cafeteria. Carlos sat at Carmen's table when there were no empty seats. Back then, he had seemed like a prince from a fairy tale, handsome, smart, charming. He courted her beautifully, brought flowers, took her to theaters and museums, whispered words of love. 6 months later, he proposed. Their wedding was modest, but deeply touching. Carmen had believed she was marrying the best man in the world. And now it turned out she'd been living all those years with a stranger. Carlos had only been playing the role of a loving husband, while in truth, he was disgusted by her. Carmen, where are you? Came Dolores's voice from the hallway. Carmen quickly hid the test and wiped her eyes. She had to pull herself together, not let the guests see her like this. Coming, she called out loudly. She stood up and went to the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes red. Carmen splashed her face with cold water from a carafe on the nightstand and pinched her cheeks to bring back some color. In the hallway, she ran straight into Carlos. He was coming from the study, phone in hand. When he saw his wife, he beamed at her with a wide smile. Ah, there you are, Carlos said cheerfully, wrapping his arms around Carmen's waist. I missed you. Carmen barely managed not to pull away. His touch now felt fake, his smile forced. Were you working? She asked, trying to sound calm. Yeah, a client called, Carlos replied casually. Urgent issue with a project. Sorry, I stepped away from the party. Carlos didn't even blink. He lied as naturally as breathing. It's fine, Carmen said quietly, turning her gaze away. It happens. The young couple returned to the guests. Carlos jumped right back into the conversation, joking, laughing, playing the charming host. Carmen mechanically served food, cleared plates, answered questions. Inside, everything was screaming with pain, but on the outside, she smiled and played the role of the happy wife. "Carmen, dear, you look so pale," one of the guests remarked kindly. "You must be tired, on your feet all day." "A little," she admitted, "but it's nothing. Our Carmen is such a hard worker," Dolores said proudly, gently patting her daughter-in-law on the head. "Always does her best for the family. Right, Carlos?" "Of course," Carlos replied with a smile. He wrapped his arm around Carmen's shoulders. "I have the best wife in the world." Carmen felt her stomach twist. Every word from Carlos now sounded like mockery. By 8 in the evening, the guests began to leave. Dolores was pleased with the celebration. She thanked them for the food, the attention, the warm atmosphere. "Thank you, my dears," the birthday woman said emotionally, hugging Carmen and Carlos. "I haven't had such a wonderful birthday in years." "We did our best, Mom," Carlos replied with a smile. "As long as you enjoyed it." The last guests left around 8:30. Carmen and Carlos were alone in the apartment. It was full of dirty dishes and leftover food from the celebration. "Tired?" Carlos asked, taking off his shirt. "Yes, very," Carmen answered softly. She began gathering plates from the table. "Leave it, let's clean up tomorrow," Carlos said carelessly. He came up behind her and hugged her. "Now, tell me, what's the news?" "I've been thinking about it all day." Carmen froze with a plate in her hands. How could she tell him about the pregnancy after what she'd heard? How could she pretend to be happy? "You know, maybe tomorrow," she said cautiously, pulling away from him. "I'm really tired today. I've got a headache." "But you said the news was good." Carlos looked disappointed. "Can't you just share it now?" "Tomorrow, really," Carmen said wearily, turning toward the sink. "I just can't think straight today." Carlos shrugged and went to the bedroom. She could hear him brushing his teeth, taking a shower, getting into bed. Carmen stood in the kitchen for a long time, mechanically washing the dishes. Warm water ran over the plates, washing away the remnants of the celebration, just as Carmen's illusions of a happy marriage were slipping away. Her husband's words echoed in her mind. "Carmen believes like a fool, this game of a happy family." Who was the woman he had spoken to? How long had it been going on? And most importantly, what now? Carmen dried her hands and slowly walked to the bedroom. Carlos was already asleep, turned to face the wall. His breathing was steady and calm. Apparently, his conscience didn't trouble him. She lay down beside him and closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was racing with thoughts, questions, and doubts. Tomorrow, she would need answers. She had to understand what was happening in her marriage and decide what to do next. For now, the pregnancy test remained in her pocket, a tiny life, completely innocent, deserving a truthful answer about the future that awaited it. Carmen placed her hand on her stomach. Beneath her heart, a new life was growing, a child that should have brought joy but now felt like one more burden in a crumbling world. She didn't sleep the whole night. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Her husband's cruel phrases replayed again and again. "Carmen believes like a fool. A game of a happy family." Each word hit like a stab to the chest. When the front door slammed shut, she realized Carlos had already left. She checked the time, 7:30 a.m., too early even for a Sunday. "Carlos?" Carmen called softly, already knowing there would be no answer. Silence. She rose from bed on shaky legs, her head spun from lack of sleep. She walked to the window and looked out into the courtyard. No one was there, just the janitor sweeping fallen leaves with a metal broom. The harsh scraping sound grated on her ears. Carmen went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Her face was sunken, dark circles under her eyes, hair sticking out in all directions. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to erase the signs of a sleepless night, but the reflection gave everything away. This is what a woman looks like whose life shattered in a single evening. She washed up, brushed her hair, and put on a robe. She had to pull herself together, at least on the outside. In the kitchen, she brewed a strong coffee. Her hands trembled so badly that the cup clinked against the saucer. She sat at the table, cupping the mug in her hands for warmth. Where was Carlos? Why had he left so early? To see the woman he was talking to on the phone? Carmen pulled the pregnancy test from her robe pocket. The 2 lines were still bright. Yesterday it had been joy, a dream come true. Today, it was a catastrophe. How could she tell her husband about the baby, knowing he thought she was a fool, that he was just pretending, and that he planned to leave? She imagined his reaction to the news, shock at first, then irritation. Terrible timing. Why did you have to get pregnant now? The thought made her sick. She placed her hand over her belly. Inside, beneath her heart, a baby was growing. A baby who had done nothing wrong. The sound of keys in the door made Carmen jump. She quickly hid the test and took a sip of coffee. She had to play a role, just like Carlos had. Good morning, sunshine, Carlos said cheerfully as he walked into the kitchen. He was in a tracksuit, his cheeks red from the cold, his hair damp with sweat. He looked energized and pleased. Where were you? Carmen asked cautiously, trying not to betray her suspicions. Out for a run, Carlos replied easily. Needed to move a bit after all that food yesterday, my head felt heavy. He leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. Carmen caught the scent of sweat mixed with his cologne. It used to comfort her, now it felt foreign. How did you sleep? Carlos asked with concern, sitting across from her. Fine, Carmen lied, avoiding his eyes. In truth, she had tossed and turned all night, thinking about the conversation she had overheard, trying to make sense of what was happening in her marriage. When had it started? How long had Carlos been lying to her? You look a bit pale, Carlos noted with mild concern. Are you feeling sick? Just tired from yesterday, Carmen replied quickly. There were a lot of guests. Of course, Carlos agreed, understandingly. You worked so hard for Mom. You did a great job. His words sounded sincere, but now Carmen could hear the falseness in every phrase. Should I make breakfast? She asked, getting up from the table. Of course, Carlos said with a smile. I'll hop in the shower, and then we'll eat. I'm starving after that run. Carlos went to the bathroom. Carmen heard the water running, the buzz of the electric razor, his humming in the shower, everything just as it always was, as if yesterday's conversation had never happened, as if nothing had changed. She placed a frying pan on the stove and took eggs out of the fridge. Her hands were still trembling. She had to take a few deep breaths just to steady herself. Maybe she'd misheard? Maybe Carlos hadn't been talking about her? Maybe it had all just been a bad dream? But his voice had been clear. He had said her name, Carmen, a game of a happy family. No, it was real. A bitter, painful truth. Smells amazing, Carlos said as he returned to the kitchen, fresh and energetic. Carmen set a plate of fried eggs in front of him, sat down across from him, and tried to smile. But the smile felt stiff and forced. Thank you, darling, Carlos said warmly. You're the best wife in the world. The same words he'd said yesterday in front of the guests. But now, Carmen heard how hollow they sounded. How fake. Carlos, Carmen began cautiously, gathering her courage. Yesterday you were on the phone, in the study. Carlos looked up from his plate. A flicker of alertness crossed his face, barely visible, but Carmen caught it. Was I? Carlos repeated indifferently. Oh, right. A client called. There were some issues with the project. On a Sunday? Carmen asked, trying to catch him in a lie. Construction doesn't take weekends off, Carlos shrugged casually. You know how it is, money never sleeps. Carmen nodded, but something kept gnawing at her, the tone wasn't right. Carlos had answered too quickly. Who was it that called? She asked casually. That client from the province? Yeah, that's the one, Carlos replied without hesitation. Issues with material deliveries, deadlines are tight. He got up from the table and kissed her on the top of her head, a familiar gesture, but now it felt mechanical. Let's go for a walk today, Carlos suggested with a smile. The weather's nice. Let's go to the park, get some fresh air. Sure, Carmen agreed, though her heart felt heavy. Still, unease kept growing inside her. Carlos's responses were too smooth, too confident, as if he'd rehearsed them all in advance. The park was full of people, families riding bikes with their kids, young couples taking photos among the golden leaves, elderly folks sitting on benches feeding pigeons. Carmen and Carlos walked hand in hand down the path. From the outside, they looked like a happy couple, but Carmen felt the falsehood in every gesture. It's so beautiful, she said, gazing at the golden plane tree leaves. Yes, autumn is lovely, Carlos agreed absent-mindedly. A young couple walked by with a baby stroller. Carmen's eyes involuntarily followed the child, rosy cheeks, bright blue eyes, chubby little hands. The parents looked at their baby with so much love, so much tenderness. But what would become of her baby? Would Carlos want this child if he was planning to leave? Or would he say it was bad timing? Carlos, Carmen said quietly, gathering her courage, I have news. Remember I said I wanted to talk? Carlos stopped and looked at her attentively. His face showed curiosity, but it felt distant, detached. Of course, he answered calmly. So, what's the news? Carmen opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she tell him about the pregnancy after what she'd heard yesterday? How could she share such joy with someone who thought she was a fool? She started, then fell silent, her resolve slipping away. What's wrong? Carlos asked, concerned. You've been acting strange all morning, quiet, pale. Just tired, Carmen lied weakly. Yesterday was a lot, so many emotions. Then tell me at home, Carlos said understandingly. When you've rested. The news isn't going anywhere. A group of kids ran by laughing, clutching colorful balloons. Carmen watched them go with sadness in her eyes. They returned home by lunchtime. Carlos turned on the TV in the living room. Carmen went to the kitchen to make a meal. In the fridge were leftovers from the day before, tortilla in a container, a piece of pork wrapped in foil. She reheated some gazpacho and sliced bread. Every movement was difficult. Her head spun from lack of sleep, and there was a tight knot in her stomach. Lunch is ready. Carmen called out, trying to sound cheerful. Carlos came into the kitchen, sat at the table, tasted the soup, and nodded approvingly. Delicious, he praised sincerely. You're the best cook ever. Carmen tried to smile, but her heart was so heavy that it wouldn't come. Carlos, she began again, building up her courage, about that call yesterday. You talked for a while. Not really, Carlos answered calmly. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes. What did you talk about? Carmen asked carefully, watching his reaction. Carlos raised an eyebrow, looked at her with surprise, maybe even a hint of irritation. Work, he said slowly. Why do you ask? You never used to be curious about my business calls. Just wondering, Carmen said quickly, worried she might sound suspicious. It's not often people call on weekends. It's business, Carmen, Carlos said in a lecturing tone. Money doesn't sleep. Clients don't care about weekends. After lunch, Carlos stretched out on the couch to watch a football match, while Carmen cleaned the kitchen, lost in grim thoughts. The sink was full of dirty dishes from yesterday's party, plates, cups, wine glasses. Carmen washed each one methodically. Every item reminded her of the day before, of the moment her world began to crumble, of the words that changed everything. She pulled out her phone and found the number of her best friend, Paula. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. Paula, it's me, Carmen said quietly, not wanting Carlos to hear. Carmen. Paula responded cheerfully. How are you? How was your mother-in-law's birthday? Paula, I need to meet with you, Carmen said seriously. It's urgent. What happened? Paula's voice changed immediately, filled with concern. You sound strange, broken. Can we meet tomorrow? Carmen asked pleadingly. At our cafe, by the fountain. Of course, Paula agreed without hesitation. Same time? 11 o'clock? Yes, 11, Carmen confirmed with relief. Carmen, you're scaring me, Paula said, worried. What's going on? It's about Carlos. I'll explain tomorrow, she replied, trying not to cry. I can't talk now. Carmen hung up. From the living room came the voices of excited commentators and Carlos shouting at the TV, cheering for his favorite team. Everything seemed normal. Just another Sunday. But she knew life had changed forever. In the evening, Carlos suggested they watch a movie, some comedy. Carmen agreed, though she had no desire to laugh. They settled on the couch. Carlos wrapped his arm around her. Carmen leaned against him, trying to feel the same warmth she used to. But the touch felt foreign. The embrace felt fake, like she was being held by a stranger pretending to be her husband. Do you want some coffee? Carmen asked, unable to bear the closeness any longer. Yes, please, Carlos replied without looking away from the screen. With cookies. Carmen walked to the kitchen, turned on the coffee machine, and took cups from the cupboard. Carlos's phone was lying on the table. He had forgotten it there after lunch. She glanced toward the living room. The sound of the movie and laughter from the TV filled the air. Her heart began to race. She picked up the phone, her pulse pounding from nerves. The screen was locked, but Carmen knew the password, the date of their wedding. How ironic. With trembling fingers, she typed in the numbers. The phone unlocked. In the messages, there were several chats, work colleagues, friends, parents, and one with no name, just a phone number. Carmen opened the thread, her heart in her throat. The last message had come yesterday at 7 p.m., right during the party. When are you finally going to tell her the truth? I'm tired of waiting. Carmen froze. It was from a woman. Written while she was preparing food for the guests. Carlos had replied. Just hang on a bit longer. It'll all be over soon. I'm tired of hiding. I want to be with you openly. I understand, but now's not the time, too many people at home. And when will be the right time? A month or two. I'll find a reason to divorce her. What will you tell your wife? That we're not right for each other. That the love is gone. And if she doesn't agree? She will. What choice does she have? Carmen is soft. She'll suffer in silence. Carmen scrolled further up. The affair had been going on for months, since spring. I miss you. When will I see you? Tomorrow for sure, after work. What about your wife? She doesn't suspect? Carmen? No, she's naive. She doesn't notice anything. I feel bad lying. Don't pity her. We'll split up soon anyway. You don't love her at all? It's just habit. Routine pulls you in. The coffee machine finished with its familiar sputtering sound. Carmen flinched and quickly returned the phone to where it had been. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the cups. Her head buzzed. Black spots floated in her vision. So it was true, Carlos had another woman, and he was planning to leave. And he thought of her, his wife, as a naive fool. Carmen. Where's that coffee? Carlos called impatiently from the living room. Coming, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She poured the coffee with trembling hands, placed the cups on a tray, and carried them into the living room. Thanks, sweetheart, Carlos said as he took the cup, without even looking at her. Carmen sat beside him, pretending to watch the movie. Something silly was happening on screen, audience laughter echoed. But in her head, thoughts spun wildly. Who is this woman? How does Carlos know her? How long has it been going on? And most of all, what should I do now? You're not watching, Carlos said, glancing at her. Not enjoying the movie? No, it's good, Carmen lied automatically. Just thinking. About what? Carlos asked gently, stroking her hand. About the fact that my husband is a liar and a cheater, she thought bitterly. About the fact that I'm pregnant by a man who despises me. About the fact that my entire life is a lie. Work, Carmen said softly aloud. Tomorrow's going to be a tough day. Don't worry, Carlos said reassuringly. Everything will be fine. Carmen nearly let out a bitter laugh. Good? When your whole life is falling apart? When a child is growing under your heart, a child its father doesn't even want? The movie ended at 10:30. Carlos stretched and yawned. Time for bed, he said, turning off the TV. Gotta get up early tomorrow. They headed to the bedroom. Carlos brushed his teeth and got into bed. Carmen stood in the bathroom for a long time, staring at her reflection in the mirror, pale face, eyes red from crying. This is what a betrayed wife looks like. She lay down beside her husband. Carlos was already drifting off, turned to face the wall. Good night, my love, he mumbled sleepily, as he always did. Good night, Carmen replied barely audibly. But sleep didn't come. She lay with her eyes open, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Next to her slept the man she had loved for 5 years, the man she had trusted completely, the man she had married believing in happiness. And now it turned out he was a stranger. That all those years she had been living inside a beautiful lie. She placed her hand on her belly. Inside her, a baby was growing, the result of a love that didn't exist. What would Carlos say when he found out she was pregnant? Would he be happy? Or would it be just another problem to him, something that complicated his exit? Carmen closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would meet Paula, tell her everything, ask for advice. But for now, she had to keep pretending, to play the role of the happy wife, just as Carlos was playing the role of the loving husband. Only now Carmen knew the truth, and that changed everything. Outside, the city murmured, occasional cars passed, a dog barked in the distance. Life carried on as usual, while in a quiet bedroom lay a husband and wife, each with their own secrets, each with their own version of the truth. And between them, a chasm was growing, widening by the hour. Monday began like any other, but Carmen hadn't forgotten her arrangement with Paula. They were to meet at 11 a.m. in their usual cafe. She just had to wait until Carlos left for work. Carlos got up at 7, took a shower, had breakfast, kissed his wife goodbye, and left for work, the same routine as always. See you tonight, darling, he said at the door. Don't miss me too much. Bye, Carmen replied with a forced smile. But at 7:30, when the door finally closed behind him, she could breathe again. Another sleepless night filled with painful thoughts. She waited until his footsteps faded down the stairs, then returned to the bedroom. Carlos's phone was lying on the nightstand, forgotten. Again, Carmen muttered under her breath. Her heart began to race. Maybe there were new messages. New pieces of the betrayal. She picked up the phone with trembling hands, entered the password with shaking fingers, and opened the conversation with the unknown number. There were new messages, from this morning, sent just an hour earlier while he was having breakfast with her. Good morning, my love. Good morning, sunshine. I missed you all night. When will I see you? I want to be with you. After work. I'll come up with something to tell Carmen. How much longer do I have to endure this lie? Not much more. I promised, didn't I? Carmen scrolled back further. The messages dated back months, since March. 6 months of deceit. She scrolled to the beginning. March. The first message. Thank you for a wonderful evening. I loved it too. It's been a long time since I felt so relaxed with a woman. And your wife? She doesn't suspect? No. Carmen's trusting, works late, always tired. I feel guilty. Don't. I chose this path myself. May. The relationship deepens. I can't hide my feelings anymore. I love you too, but we need time. How much longer? Until autumn, then we'll decide everything. July. The plans become more concrete. Are you seriously thinking about divorce? Yes. Carmen and I are more like roommates than spouses now. And if she objects? She won't. Carmen is soft, compliant. You looked amazing yesterday in that red dress. Thank you. I bought it just for you. I just wish we could be together openly. Soon everything will change. My wife suspects nothing. And if she finds out? She won't. Carmen is too trusting. I feel sorry for her. Why? She'll find someone else eventually. You're cruel. I'm a realist. Love fades, only habit remains. Carmen threw the phone aside and grabbed her head. Her hands were shaking so badly the phone nearly slipped from her grip. Her stomach twisted into a painful knot. 6 months. Carlos had been seeing another woman for half a year, telling her the same sweet words he told his wife, promising to leave his family. How could she have noticed nothing? Was she really such a naive fool? She thought back over the past few months. Carlos had started staying late at work more often, talking about tough projects and urgent deadlines. Carmen had believed every word. On weekends, he sometimes went out to job sites. I need to check the progress, he had explained. Carmen never questioned it, she supported him. How blind she had been. All those business trips, late nights, sudden calls, classic signs of infidelity. And she had seen nothing. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the weekday bustle carried on, people rushing to work, each with their own worries, problems, secrets. And Carmen? She carried a child under her heart, a child whose father saw his family as a burden. She had to call in sick. There was no way she could function at work today. Teresa, she said, dialing her boss with trembling fingers. It's Carmen. I'm sick. I won't be coming in today. What happened? Teresa asked with concern. Your voice sounds broken. I've got a fever, Carmen lied. Must have caught something at the party. Rest and take care of yourself, Teresa said gently. Health comes first. Carmen hung up and picked up Carlos's phone again. She had to see everything, to understand the full extent of the betrayal. In the photo gallery, there were pictures, many pictures, that she had never seen before. Carlos with an unfamiliar woman. A blonde, about 25, beautiful and slim, with a bright smile, wearing the red dress she had mentioned in the messages. Carlos and the blonde embracing in a restaurant. Kissing on a boardwalk. Walking in a park Carmen had always thought of as their special place. In one photo, the woman was wearing a familiar blouse. Carmen had seen that blouse in her own closet. That meant Carlos's lover had been in their home. Oh God, she whispered, nausea rising in her throat. In this bed, where Carmen had slept with her husband for 5 years. Another woman had lain. In their house, which Carmen had considered sacred. She ran to the bathroom. Carmen vomited violently, her stomach clenching with spasms, her head spinning from sheer horror. She slid to the floor and broke down in tears, a flood of emotion that she had been holding in for days. It hurt so much. It was humiliating. 5 years of marriage had been a farce. 5 years of love, a one-sided feeling. An hour later, Carmen was able to pull herself together. She had to get ready for her meeting with Paula. She remembered their conversation from the day before. Tomorrow at 11, at our cafe, they had agreed. It was now 9 a.m. She needed to make herself presentable. She didn't want to frighten her friend with how she looked. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time, trying to cover the dark circles under her eyes with foundation. She chose a closed sweater to hide the tremble in her hands. Several times, she rehearsed how she would tell Paula about her discovery. At 11 a.m., Carmen arrived at the cafe by the fountain, their favorite place. She and Paula had been friends since university, meeting here weekly to share news, problems, and happy moments. Paula was already sitting at their corner table, a dark-haired, energetic 30-year-old woman who worked as a journalist at the city newspaper. "Carmen." Paula stood up and hugged her tightly. "You look awful. What happened?" Carmen sat down across from her. Her hands were shaking, her eyes red from crying. "Paula, I have a problem," Carmen said quietly. "A serious problem with Carlos." "Tell me everything," Paula said seriously. "I'm listening." Carmen told her everything. About the overheard conversation on Saturday, the messages she found, the photos of Carlos with another woman. Paula listened silently, her expression growing darker with every word. "That bastard," she said softly when Carmen finished. "He lied to you for 6 months. What filth." "Paula, you didn't know anything?" Carmen asked pleadingly. "You never saw him with someone?" Paula hesitated, looked away, and nervously turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Paula," Carmen said anxiously, pressing her. "Tell me the truth. What do you know?" "Carmen," Paula sighed heavily. "A month ago, I saw him at the mall. With a blonde." "And you didn't tell me?" Carmen cried out loudly. "I thought maybe she was a colleague," Paula said guiltily, trying to justify herself. "Or a client. They were just talking." "What do you mean just talking?" Carmen asked tensely. "Tell me exactly what you saw, please." "It was on a Saturday," Paula said sadly. "I was buying a gift for my niece. I noticed a familiar figure, Carlos, standing near a jewelry store." "A jewelry store?" Carmen turned even paler. "Yes," Paula nodded carefully. "He was looking at rings. With the blonde. She was trying them on. Carlos had his arm around her waist, kissed her on the temple." "A ring?" Carmen whispered in horror. "Carmen, it's possible, he's planning to propose to her," Paula said cautiously. "After divorcing me," Carmen finished bitterly. They were standing very close, Paula admitted, now completely remorseful. Carlos was holding her hand. "But I thought maybe I imagined it." "Oh God, Paula." Carmen clutched her head. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't want to ruin your happiness," Paula said sadly. "You two seemed like such a perfect couple." "What happiness?" Carmen let out a bitter laugh. "What perfect couple? It was all a lie." Paula reached across the table and took Carmen's hands in her warm ones. "Carmen, I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "I should have told you, but I was afraid I might be wrong." "It doesn't matter now," Carmen replied wearily. "What matters is, what do I do next?" "Get a divorce, of course," Paula said firmly. "You can't forgive something like this." "Paula, there's something else," Carmen said quietly. "I'm pregnant." Paula's mouth dropped open. Her coffee cup slipped from her hands and shattered loudly on the floor. "What?" Paula exclaimed, stunned. "Pregnant? When did you find out?" "On Saturday," Carmen replied weakly. "I was going to tell Carlos during the party, and then I heard that conversation." "Oh, Carmen," Paula pulled her into a tight hug. "How did this happen?" "We tried for 3 years," Carmen said through tears. "And finally, it happened." "And now?" "And now what?" Paula asked firmly. "A child is a blessing, regardless of the father." "But how will I manage alone?" Carmen asked, frightened. "With a baby?" "You won't be alone," Paula said confidently. "I'll help. Your parents will help. You will manage, no doubt about it." "And what if Carlos wants to keep the child?" Carmen asked anxiously. "By law, the child stays with the mother," Paula said, with professional clarity. "Especially when it's an infant." They sat in silence for a few minutes. A waitress cleared away the broken cup and brought a fresh one with hot coffee. "Carmen, will you tell him?" Paula asked gently. "About the pregnancy?" "I don't know," Carmen admitted, lost. "I'm scared of how he'll react." What if he comes to his senses? Paula suggested hopefully. What if, when he finds out about the baby, he wants to save the marriage? After those messages? Carmen gave a bitter smile. Carlos thinks I'm a fool. He says the love is gone. Then forget him. Paula said sharply. Start a new life, without him. Easy for you to say, Carmen sighed. 5 years together. The habits, the plans, the dreams. What plans? Paula asked sternly. What dreams? Carlos already made the decision for you. What should I do today? Carmen asked helplessly. How should I act? Don't say anything yet, Paula advised wisely. First, prepare yourself. Find a lawyer. Learn your rights. A lawyer? Carmen said, alarmed. Of course. Paula said firmly. You'll need legal support for the divorce, especially with a baby involved. Maybe it's not too late, Carmen asked with a flicker of hope. Maybe I should talk to him? Carmen, Paula said seriously, 6 months of betrayal isn't a mistake, it's a choice. Carmen nodded. Deep down, she knew her friend was right. They stayed at the cafe for 2 hours. Paula comforted her, supported her, and gave practical advice. The most important thing, don't let him see that you know, Paula said as they said goodbye. Not until you're ready to talk. How can I hide it? Carmen asked helplessly. I don't know how to pretend. You'll have to learn, Paula said firmly. Play his own game. Carmen returned home around 3 p.m. Carlos was still at work. She needed to go through the house, look for signs of the other woman's presence. She started in the living room. On the coffee table were receipts from restaurants, expensive places she and Carlos had never gone to, bills for 2, fine wine, exotic dishes. In a desk drawer, she found a business card from a beauty salon, manicure, pedicure. Anna. Carmen had never gone to that salon, so the card had to belong to the mistress. In Carlos's jacket pocket were tickets to the theater, from last week. Carmen remembered that evening well. Carlos had said he was working overtime. The bedroom looked normal, but Carmen noticed odd details. One of her blouses was missing, the same one the blonde wore in one of the photos. In the bathroom was a new bottle of shampoo, an expensive, imported brand. She didn't use it. Carlos must have bought it for his lover. In the kitchen trash, she saw an empty box of luxury chocolates. Carlos had told her he bought them for his mother, but never gave them to her. Each discovery felt like a knife to the heart. Another woman had been in their home, used their things, slept in their bed. Carmen sat down on the couch and pulled out her phone. She found the number of a family lawyer. A colleague had once recommended him. Alejandro, Carmen said in a trembling voice, Lucia gave me your number. I need a consultation about divorce. Of course, the lawyer replied professionally. When can you come in? Tomorrow morning, Carmen asked. It's urgent. All right, he agreed. Come at 10 a.m. Bring your marriage documents. She wrote down the address. The first step was taken. Tomorrow, she would learn her rights. At 6 p.m., Carlos came home, cheerful and content. He kissed her as usual. How are you, sweetheart? Carlos asked warmly. What did you do today? Stayed home, she replied calmly. Had a headache. Called in sick. Good, Carlos said, concerned. Health is more important than work. Hypocrite, Carmen thought. Playing the caring husband while secretly planning to run off to his mistress. And you, she asked, feigning interest. How was work? Fine, Carlos answered casually. Meetings, projects, same old routine. Will you be working late again tomorrow? Carmen asked cautiously. Possibly, Carlos replied vaguely. There's a backlog from the weekend. Carmen nodded knowingly. Now she understood exactly what her husband's backlog meant. The evening passed as usual, dinner, TV, small talk. Carlos was charming and attentive, but Carmen saw the falseness in every gesture, heard the lies in every word. At 10 p.m., Carlos's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. "Sorry, work call," Carlos said in an apologetic tone. "Important client." He walked into the study. Carmen listened closely to the conversation. "Hi, sunshine," Carlos said softly and tenderly. "Missed you all day." "Of course I'm free." "Carmen's asleep, she always goes to bed early." "We'll definitely see each other tomorrow after work." "Love you too." "See you soon, darling." Carmen turned to face the wall, tears rolled down her cheeks, but she had to cry quietly. Carlos returned 5 minutes later and got into bed beside his wife. "Working late, huh?" Carmen said with a hint of reproach. "That's the job," Carlos sighed. "Clients don't care about the time." "Good night," Carmen said quietly. "Good night, my love," Carlos replied, as he always did, but she no longer believed a word he said. Tomorrow would be the start of a new life, a life without illusions. Tuesday began with Carmen waking before her husband. By 7 a.m., she was already in the kitchen, making breakfast. Her hands trembled less than the day before. The decision was made. Today she would see the lawyer. Today she would learn her rights. And tonight, she would confront Carlos. "Good morning, sweetheart," Carlos said as he entered the kitchen, fresh from the shower. "Morning," Carmen replied evenly. She placed a plate of eggs in front of him, then sat across the table, watching him closely. "How did you sleep?" Carlos asked kindly, cutting into his eggs. "Fine," Carmen lied calmly. In truth, she hadn't slept again, spent the night rehearsing what to say, preparing for the worst. "I'm not going to work today," Carmen said casually. "I'll take another sick day." "Good," Carlos approved warmly. "Make sure you get better." "Will you be home late again today?" Carmen asked innocently. Carlos looked up from his plate, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "Why do you ask?" he said cautiously. "I wanted to make something special for dinner," Carmen explained with a sweet smile. "Haven't spoiled you in a while." "That's sweet of you," Carlos said with visible relief. "I'll try to get home early." But Carmen saw him quickly reach under the table to send a text. Probably warning his mistress about a change of plans, she thought bitterly. "I have to go," Carlos said, getting up from the table. "Important meeting with clients today." Carlos kissed his wife on the forehead as usual. Carmen forced herself not to pull away. "Goodbye," she said neutrally. "See you tonight," Carlos replied and left. Carmen waited until his footsteps faded down the stairs, then quickly got dressed and left the house. The lawyer's office was located in the city center, a stately building with marble columns. Alejandro turned out to be a middle-aged man with graying temples, attentive and professional. "Tell me everything in detail," the lawyer requested. Carmen told him everything about her husband's affair, her pregnancy, and her desire to get a divorce. "I see," Alejandro nodded seriously. "Do you have proof of the infidelity?" "Messages on his phone," she replied, "and photos with his mistress." "Good," the lawyer said approvingly. "That will help in court." "How is the property divided?" Carmen asked practically. "Whose name is the apartment under?" the lawyer clarified. "My husband's," Carmen replied. "But we bought it during the marriage." "Then by law, half is yours," Alejandro explained professionally. "Plus, child support, 1/4 of your husband's salary." "And if Carlos agrees to a peaceful divorce?" Carmen asked hopefully. "Then we can process it through the civil registry," the lawyer said confidently. "Faster and cheaper, but both parties must agree." "What about the child?" Carmen asked, concerned. "The child stays with the mother," the lawyer stated confidently. "The father will be legally obligated to pay child support." "What if Carlos refuses to acknowledge paternity?" Carmen asked fearfully. "We'll do a DNA test after the baby is born," Alejandro explained calmly. But that's just a formality. The lawyer walked her through the entire divorce process, explained property division, and gave her practical advice. The main thing, don't rush, he said at the end of the meeting. Prepare yourself emotionally. Gather all the necessary documents. When's the best time to tell my husband? She asked nervously. When you're ready, Alejandro replied wisely. But don't wait too long either. Carmen returned home at 1 p.m., feeling more confident. Now she knew her rights. She knew what to do next. The rest of the day was spent preparing. Carmen was cooking a special dinner, perhaps the last one they would share together. She stood in front of the bedroom mirror, rehearsing what she would say. Carlos, I know about your affair. Too harsh. We need to talk. Too soft. Carmen pressed a hand to her belly, and sighed. A baby was growing. A child who had the right to know the truth about their father. At 6 p.m., Carlos came home. He looked surprised at the beautifully set table. Wow! Carlos said in amazement. What's the occasion? Just felt like it, Carmen replied with a mysterious smile. On the table were all of Carlos's favorite dishes, herb-roasted pork, shrimp salad, red wine, and crystal glasses. Thank you, darling. Carlos said, touched. You're the best wife in the world. How easily he lies, Carmen thought. How naturally he says those fake words. They had dinner, talking about trivial things. Carlos spoke about work. Carmen only half listened, watching her husband closely. Carlos, she said firmly after dinner, I need to talk to you. About what? Carlos asked casually, pouring himself more wine. About us, Carmen replied seriously. About our relationship. Carlos set his glass on the table and looked at her carefully. Did something happen? He asked, his tone suddenly guarded. You could say that, Carmen said calmly. She stood up from the table and slowly walked over to him, sitting beside him on the couch. Carlos, I know, Carmen said quietly but firmly. Know what? Carlos asked, visibly tense and growing pale. About her, she said simply. Your mistress. Carlos turned even paler and set his glass down with a trembling hand. What are you talking about? He asked uncertainly. What mistress? The blonde. 25 years old. You've been seeing her since March, Carmen answered, calm and clear. Carmen, what are you saying? Carlos stammered, but Carmen cut him off. I read your messages, she said firmly. I saw the photos. Carlos covered his face with his hands and sat in silence for a long time, breathing heavily. How did you find out? Carlos asked quietly, without raising his head. By accident, Carmen replied flatly. I overheard your call on Saturday. What call? Carlos asked, lifting his head in confusion. The one where you were talking to her on the phone, Carmen said coldly. Calling me a fool. Saying I'm naive. Carlos raised his head and looked at her with guilt in his eyes. Carmen, I can explain, he began in a pleading voice. Explain, Carmen said in an icy tone. It just happened, Carlos stammered. I didn't plan it. You didn't plan it, for 6 months? Carmen asked with biting irony. I wanted to tell you, Carlos said defensively, but I didn't know how. Wanted to tell me? Carmen repeated sarcastically. Or just wanted to leave quietly? Carlos stayed silent. The answer was written all over his pale face. Do you love her? Carmen asked directly, her fists clenched. Carlos didn't respond for a long time. Finally, he nodded slowly. Yes, he admitted quietly. I love her. And me? Carmen asked, looking him straight in the eye. Do you love me? Carmen, we've been living like roommates for a while now, Carlos said cautiously. You see that too. I see that I've been living in a lie for 5 years, she replied bitterly. Not a lie, Carlos said weakly. The feelings just changed. Changed? Carmen repeated painfully. Or were they never real? Were you planning to marry her? She asked bluntly. Carlos flinched as if struck. How do you know that? He whispered in alarm. Paula saw you two at the jewelry store, Carmen said calmly. You were picking out a ring. Carlos began, but the words stuck in his throat. So it's serious, Carmen said with a bitter smile. Not just a fling. Yes, Carlos admitted barely audibly. It's serious. And when's the wedding? Carmen asked mockingly. Right after our divorce? Carlos covered his face in shame. In 6 months? Was that the plan, 6 months? Carlos didn't respond. He stood up and walked abruptly to the window. What do you want? He asked without turning around. Honesty, Carmen said firmly. I want the truth. What truth? Carlos asked tiredly. When did you stop loving me? She asked bluntly. Carlos turned to her. His face was worn and weary. I don't know, Carlos admitted honestly. It happened gradually. And her? Carmen asked. How did you meet? At work, Carlos said quietly. Estrella is a designer. She works with our firm. Estrella, Carmen repeated with a smirk. Beautiful name. Carmen, I never meant to hurt you, Carlos said with guilt. But you did, Carmen stated coldly. For 6 months, you hurt me. I didn't know what to do, Carlos said defensively. I was afraid of hurting you. But you weren't afraid to hurt me with your lies, Carmen replied sharply. Carlos lowered his head. He looked miserable and pathetic. What happens now? Carlos asked quietly. Divorce, Carmen answered calmly. Carmen, maybe we can think about it. Carlos pleaded. Talk it through calmly? Talk about what? She asked in disbelief. You've already made your choice. But we've been together for so many years, Carlos said desperately. Together, yes, Carmen agreed sadly. But you were thinking about someone else. Carlos sat back down on the couch and gently took her hands. Carmen, let's try again, he begged. I'll break it off with her. No need, Carmen said, pulling her hands away. It's too late. Too late? Why? Carlos asked, confused. Because I'm pregnant, Carmen said quietly. Carlos froze, his eyes widened in shock. What? He repeated, stunned. I'm pregnant, Carmen repeated patiently. I found out on Saturday. Saturday? Carlos echoed, still in disbelief. I was going to tell you during the party, she explained sadly. But then I overheard your call. Carlos stood up and began pacing nervously around the room. Pregnant, he murmured, stunned. How is that possible? The usual way, Carmen said dryly. But we've been trying for so long. Carlos said, bewildered. And now it finally happened, Carmen confirmed bitterly. Carlos stopped and looked at her, fear in his eyes. So what now? He asked, lost. Now, I'm going to have this child, Carmen said firmly. And you'll decide for yourself. Decide what? Carlos didn't understand. Whether you stay with me or go to her, Carmen explained calmly. Carlos slowly sat down at the table as if his legs couldn't hold him, then poured himself a full glass of wine. This is too much, too sudden, Carlos muttered. I need time to think. Of course, Carmen agreed indifferently. Just know, I won't wait anymore. What does that mean? Carlos asked warily. It means I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, she said firmly. Tomorrow? Carlos exclaimed in horror. Why so soon? Because I'm tired of living in uncertainty, Carmen answered wearily. Carlos downed the wine in one gulp and sat in silence, processing the situation. And if I choose you? Carlos asked uncertainly. It's too late, Carmen replied firmly. The trust is gone. Carmen, you can't be so absolute, Carlos pleaded. I can, she countered resolutely. When you've lived in lies for 6 months. Carlos stood and walked over to her, awkwardly trying to hug her. Don't touch me, Carmen said coldly. Carmen, please, Carlos begged. Give me a chance. You already used it, she replied, unyielding. Carlos moved to the window and stared out silently for a long time. All right, he said quietly with a heavy sigh. I understand. Understand what? Carmen asked. That it's over, Carlos answered sadly. Yes, Carmen confirmed. It's over. Carlos turned to her, his eyes glistening with tears. I never wanted it to end like this, he said sincerely. But it did, Carmen stated simply. What about the baby? Carlos asked with concern. The baby stays with me, she replied firmly. I'll help, Carlos promised. You're legally obligated, Carmen reminded him coldly. Carlos nodded in understanding. He knew he deserved her attitude. I'll pack my things, Carlos said quietly. Today? Carmen clarified. Yes, he said with resolve. It's better this way. Carlos slowly walked into the bedroom. She heard the sounds of him packing, zippers, rustling clothes. Half an hour later, he returned with 2 large bags. Is that everything? Carmen asked calmly. For now, Carlos answered softly. I'll come back for the rest later. They stood awkwardly in the hallway, 5 years of marriage ending in that narrow corridor. Carmen, I'm sorry, Carlos said quietly. I forgive you, Carmen replied simply. If you need anything, Carlos began. My lawyer will contact you, Carmen cut him off briskly. Carlos nodded, opened the door with a trembling hand. Goodbye, he said at the threshold. Goodbye, Carmen replied. The door closed quietly. The girl was left alone in the silent apartment. She walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and gently placed her hand on her stomach. It's just us now, baby, Carmen whispered. But we'll be okay. Outside, the streetlights glowed softly, the city continued its usual rhythm, while in the small apartment, a new story was beginning, a story of a mother and her child, a story without lies or betrayal, a story of hope for a better future. The first night alone felt strange. Carmen lay in the middle of the large bed, unsure where to place her hands. For 5 years, Carlos had slept beside her, now half the bed lay empty. But strangely, she wasn't afraid. On the contrary, for the first time in many days, Carmen felt peace. No more pretending, no more playing the part of the happy wife. On Wednesday morning, Carmen woke up feeling nauseous and ran to the bathroom. There it was, morning sickness, the first real sign that her life was truly changing. Good morning, little one, Carmen whispered gently, placing a hand on her belly. How are you doing? Of course, the baby didn't respond, but she felt warmth, comfort. They were a team now, mother and child against the world. The first thing she needed to do was call work and talk to her boss. Teresa, she said nervously into the phone. It's Carmen. Can I come see you? I need to talk. Of course, Teresa answered kindly. Is it serious? Yes, Carmen admitted. Very serious. An hour later, she was sitting in Teresa's office, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. They had worked together for 3 years. Tell me everything, her boss said gently. What's happened? I'm getting a divorce, Carmen said directly, and I'm expecting a child. Teresa set down her pen, clearly surprised, and looked at her employee with concern. Oh my God, the manager said with sympathy. How did this happen? My husband found someone else, Carmen explained calmly. He'd been cheating for 6 months. What a scumbag, Teresa said, genuinely outraged. And now? Now I'm alone with a baby on the way, Carmen answered simply. I need my job. Carmen, Teresa said warmly, don't worry. You have your job. Thank you, Carmen replied with relief. What about maternity leave? Teresa asked practically. I'll work as long as I can, Carmen promised firmly. I need the income. I understand, Teresa nodded compassionately. If you need anything, just ask. We'll help however we can. After speaking with her boss, Carmen headed to the women's clinic. It was time to officially register her pregnancy. It's still early, the doctor said professionally, studying the test results. About 6 weeks. How are you feeling? Morning sickness, Carmen answered honestly. And I get tired easily. That's normal, the doctor reassured her kindly. Take your vitamins, get plenty of rest, and avoid stress. I'll try, Carmen promised, without mentioning the divorce. Does the baby's father know? The doctor asked delicately. He knows, Carmen confirmed briefly. After the clinic, Carmen stopped by the grocery store. It was time to change her diet and think about the baby. In the baby food aisle, a young mother stood with a stroller. Her baby was sleeping with tiny fists clenched. Carmen watched him for a long moment. Soon she would have a little one just like that, small, helpless, and completely dependent on her. Beautiful baby, Carmen said sincerely to the young mother. Thank you, the woman smiled brightly. My son's 2 months old. Your first? Carmen asked with curiosity. Yes, the mother nodded enthusiastically. It was scary at first, but now I can't imagine life without him. Carmen bought prenatal vitamins, cottage cheese, fruit, milk, everything for her future child's health. At home, she called Paula. Her friend immediately sensed something in her voice. Carmen, what's wrong? Paula asked, concerned. You sound different. I talked to Carlos, Carmen said calmly. He's gone. For good? Paula asked anxiously. For good, Carmen confirmed firmly. He took his things yesterday. And how are you? Her friend asked carefully. Honestly? Okay, Carmen said, surprised even at herself. It actually feels like a relief. Really? Paula sounded doubtful. You're not pretending? I'm not, Carmen assured her sincerely. The truth is better than a beautiful lie. That's my girl. Paula praised warmly. And the baby? Did you tell him? I did, Carmen confirmed. Carlos was shocked. What did he say? Paula asked, curious. That he'll help, Carmen replied indifferently. Legally he has to. Well, that's something. Paula said with satisfaction. So, what's the plan for today? I'm going to see my parents, Carmen decided. Time to tell them everything. Her parents lived in another part of the city. Her father was retired, her mother worked at the local library, simple, honest people. Carmen, her mother exclaimed happily, opening the door. What a surprise! Hi, Mom, Carmen said warmly, hugging her. Come in, her mother fussed joyfully. Your father's in the garage, I'll call him in a minute. They sat down in the kitchen at the round table. Her mother started the coffee maker and brought out some cookies. You look pale, her mother said with concern. Are you sick? Mom, I need to tell you something, Carmen said seriously. Her father entered the kitchen, a tall, gray-haired man in work overalls. My daughter's here, he said with genuine joy. Where's Carlos? That's what I came to talk about, Carmen said quietly. Her parents sat down next to her, suddenly serious. Carlos and I are getting a divorce, she said directly. Her mother gasped in shock, and her father's brow furrowed angrily. Getting a divorce? Her mother asked, confused. Why? He found another woman, Carmen explained calmly. He's been cheating for 6 months. Son of a bitch, her father muttered angrily. Manuel, her mother scolded him sharply. Not in front of our daughter. Why not in front of her? Her father retorted. He's a bastard, not a man. Mom, Dad, Carmen said gently, there's something else. What is it? They asked in unison, visibly worried. I'm pregnant, Carmen said softly. Silence fell. Her parents were processing what they'd just heard, not quite believing it. Pregnant, her mother repeated, stunned. Yes, Carmen nodded calmly. I found out over the weekend. And now what? Her father asked, bewildered. Now I'm going to have the baby, Carmen said firmly, and I'll raise it on my own. On your own? Her mother cried out in fear. How on your own? How else? Carmen shrugged philosophically. Carlos chose someone else. But the baby's his too, her mother protested. It is, Carmen agreed. But Carlos doesn't want this. Why didn't you tell us? Her mother said, tears in her voice. We would have helped, supported you. I didn't want to upset you, Carmen explained guiltily. I thought I could handle it on my own. Sweetheart, we're family, her father said firmly. In a family, we face problems together. I know that now, Carmen nodded, remorseful. I won't hide anything again. And how did Carlos react to the pregnancy? Her mother asked cautiously. He was stunned, Carmen admitted. He suggested we try again, but it's too late. You did the right thing, her father said decisively. He's a traitor, not a husband. He stood and began pacing the kitchen, agitated. If I could just get my hands on that bastard, he muttered angrily, have a man-to-man talk. Dad, don't, she pleaded softly. It's already decided. Carmen, darling, her mother said through tears, how will you manage all by yourself? I'll manage, Carmen said confidently. I'm not the first and won't be the last. And we'll help you, her mother promised fervently. Of course we will, her father echoed firmly. Our grandchild's on the way. Or granddaughter, Carmen smiled hopefully. Doesn't matter, her father said firmly. As long as the baby is healthy. Her mother wept from emotion and hugged her daughter tightly. My sweet girl, her mother whispered gently. I feel so sorry for you. Don't be sorry, Carmen asked. Better to be happy, you're going to be grandparents soon. We are happy, her father said firmly. Grandchildren are a blessing. Carmen spent the entire evening with her parents, sharing details, making plans, and feeling their support. Move in with us, her mother offered warmly. We've got a spare room. Thank you, Carmen said gratefully. For now I'll stay in the apartment, but we'll see later. And money? Her father asked practically. I'm working, Carmen answered confidently. He'll pay child support. I'll manage. And if you don't? Her mother asked with concern. I will, Carmen repeated firmly. I absolutely will. She returned home late. The apartment was quiet and empty, but it no longer frightened her. The next day, Carmen went to a baby store, time to buy the essentials. First baby? The saleswoman asked kindly, noticing Carmen's uncertain expression. Yes, Carmen nodded honestly. And I'll be raising the baby alone. I see, the woman said sympathetically. Then just get the basics for now, stroller, crib, car seat. You can add the rest later. Carmen nodded gratefully. It felt good to meet people who understood. Back home, she walked into the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. Half was empty where Carlos's clothes had been. Now she could arrange things her own way. She pulled out an old pair of jeans, they'd soon be too tight. Time to buy maternity clothes. She wondered, would it be a boy or a girl? It didn't really matter. The only thing that mattered was that the baby was healthy. On the nightstand lay documents from the lawyer. Tomorrow, she'd submit the divorce papers to the civil registry. Carmen picked up a pen and signed without hesitation. The old life was over. A new one was beginning. Her phone lit up with a message from Carlos. How are you? How are you feeling? Carmen thought for a moment, then replied. I'm fine. Tomorrow I'm filing for divorce. The reply came quickly. I understand. Call me if you need anything. She didn't answer. The conversation was over. A new chapter had begun. She lay down in bed and placed her hand gently on her belly, Inside was her baby, still tiny, but already deeply loved. "We'll be okay," Carmen whispered softly in the dark. "I promise you a good life." Outside, the city buzzed through the night. Windows lit up here and there, each hiding its own story, its own joy or heartbreak. And in this small apartment, a new family was beginning, just two people, a mother and her child. 6 months later, Carmen stood by the window of the nursery, stroking her rounded belly. 3 weeks to go until the birth. The doctors said it would be a girl. "We'll see each other soon, Sophia," Carmen whispered softly. She had chosen the name herself, Sophia, wisdom. May her daughter grow up smart and strong. The nursery was ready, a crib, a changing table, a small wardrobe filled with tiny clothes, all in pink and white, soft and delicate. The divorce had gone through quickly. Carlos hadn't objected, even helped with the paperwork. He paid child support regularly, but they avoided seeing each other. Paula often visited her friend, helping her pick out a stroller, a crib, clothes. She was already the godmother of the unborn baby. "How are you feeling?" Paula asked with concern as she walked into the apartment. "A bit heavy," Carmen admitted honestly. "But it'll be over soon." "Are you nervous?" her friend asked kindly. "A little," Carmen said truthfully. "But more excited than anything." They sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee with cake. Paula had brought yet another gift for the baby girl. "Have you heard anything from Carlos?" Paula asked cautiously. "He sends the support payments," Carmen replied indifferently. "Nothing else." "Good," Paula said sharply. "No reason for him to show up here." "I wouldn't mind," Carmen surprised her calmly. "If he wants to see his daughter, he can." "Seriously?" Paula asked in disbelief. "Seriously," Carmen nodded with conviction. "Sophia has the right to know her father." "You're incredible," Paula said, shaking her head in admiration. "After everything that happened?" "Anger destroys," Carmen said wisely. "And I need all my strength for my daughter." After Paula left, Carmen sat in the nursery for a long time, imagining the little person who would soon live there, night feedings, first words, first steps, kindergarten, school, graduation, all of it ahead. Would it be hard? Of course. But Carmen was ready. She had a job, supportive parents, a loyal friend, and most importantly, a deep love for her future daughter. She dreamed of giving Sophia the best, a good education, travel, the freedom to pursue her passions, and most of all, to teach her to be strong and independent, so she'd never rely entirely on a man. Carmen stroked her belly and smiled. Life was moving forward, a new, honest, real life. And ahead, only good things.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.